Hey, welcome to another episode of Security and GRC Decoded. I'm your favorite host, Raj Krishnamurthy. And today I'm joined by James Tabron. James Tabron has 20 plus years in IT. In the last 10 years, he has focused on, I would say, a combination of GRC engineering and software engineering. James, that puts you in a very unique quadrant. We want to talk all about that. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive into a variety of topics here. And I know prepping for this call, we had some really good conversations. So most certainly excited to continue that.
Thank you, James. What brought you to GRC and what took you to software engineering?
Well, I started my career in, so I graduated with a degree from Indiana University. I'm a big Hoosier. If you watch any of my posts or follow me at all. So I was really happy we won the national championship. See if we can do it again. But nonetheless, I graduated with a degree in computer information systems. And to kind of start that career after a couple of internships, I started in IT, right? Like help desk, systems administration type work. And that's really where I started my career. And during that time, I was actually producing music on the side because I thought, well, I should probably give myself a shot to go into the arts. So I was doing help desk work during the day and producing music at night, and trying to give myself a shot at a career in music production, which is something I really love to do. And at some point I decided, I'm going to switch from the music production thing and I'm going to actually start focusing more on my career. And I had a good friend who worked for the Department of Defense who said, hey, you should give cybersecurity a try. But before I did that, I actually got a CCNA. I thought I was going to go into networking. That was a very tough certification to get if you've ever took the CCNA exam. But then I did one project at the time I was working for Deloitte. I did one project over the weekend in networking and I was in a closet all day. And I was like, this isn't for me. This isn't going to work. So I gave cybersecurity a shot. Had a good friend worked for the DoD who said, "Hey, you should try this out. I can kind of guide you through the process if you're looking to pivot away from IT or networking." So I did. I got my Security Plus certification, and then I got offered a job at the Baylor College of Medicine as an IT security coordinator. And that role is where I first kind of got introduced to GRC, a GRC type role. It wasn't a GRC focused role, but there was, policy development, some HIPAA, disaster recovery and business continuity, projects that I had to own, thinking through encryption, how you encrypt devices. So there were some GRC tones to that role. And then my wife and we moved to Denver, and I looked at a role at a company called SendGrid that was a security compliance analyst role. And it matched a lot of what I was doing in my role at Baylor. And I got offered that role. Everything moved really fast. And I say that's really my first pure GRC role at a fast growing tech startup that was eventually went public and was purchased by Twilio, which I continue to work at as well. But the SendGrid role, I owned our SOC 2 program, built our enterprise risk management program, and did all the GRC things: customer support, questionnaires, third-party risk management, security awareness training in person for that role, which was really cool, getting to meet everybody who joined the company, especially when you're growing really fast, managing audits, testing controls, validating controls, designing controls. It was just a pure GRC program, developing policies, things of that nature. So the role at SendGrid was my first GRC specific role.
Okay. And then that is very interesting. From SendGrid, you actually continued to move on to Twilio, did the compliance assurance, and then you went into Snapdocs, and then you came back to Twilio as running software engineering.
Yeah. Yeah.
What happened there? Explain to us the transition.
Yeah. So, in during my time at SendGrid, the way I ran the SOC 2 program was very soft skill heavy, right? People are the understanding how to work with people is really the engine, especially in a traditional GRC um, model or environment. Having the knowledge of the frameworks and risk management and cybersecurity principles is great, but none of that matters if you can't uh, work effectively with people, build partnerships, build bridges, have a pragmatic approach that actually enables the business to make money and allows developers to move faster and the business to move faster and accelerate their revenue generation opportunities. So, um, I ran the program in a very mature fashion, and in doing so, I built really strong relationships with engineering leaders. And so, and kind of built a reputation as someone who, from a security standpoint, was very pragmatic, easy to deal with, remove the black box of security, made it more visible, built partnerships with different business functions across the organization. So I built a reputation that really, worked well for me as a professional. And when we were purchased by Twilio, yes, I did join the Twilio security team, helping build our compliance assurance team that was kind of newly formed under a different leader at the time. And I was just a part of helping build that. My knowledge and my experience at SendGrid was really helpful and valuable at the time. And I was there for I don't know, maybe 6 months or so, and I just decided that it was time. I really wanted to go out and try to build another program in a 0 to 1 motion. So I went to Snapdocs, San Francisco based company, and started building out our GRC program and continued to work with engineering teams on how to, to shift security a little bit further left, start putting risk management and risk assessment processes in the software delivery life cycle and understanding how engineers work and how they deploy and how different teams do it a different way. And I was doing the same thing at SendGrid. We took that approach of let's go sit down with the engineers and let's go understand how they work so we can start designing controls that enable what they already do, as opposed to trying to make them fit into what we're trying to do from a compliance perspective. And it was the summer of 20, where one of the leaders that I had worked with at SendGrid, he was a director at the time. He had actually been promoted to vice president of engineering over the email marketing campaign platform that SendGrid built as like a sub business unit on top of transactional email or alongside transactional email. And Twilio purchased, the entire product portfolio. And so this engineer that I had worked with, an engineering leader that I had worked with in the past, we had built a pretty good friendship and relationship. And, he approached me in the summer of 20, and he said, "Hey, I'm thinking about building out a DevSecOps program inside of my engineering team." Because he had previously held a role in leadership at a security focused company. So he was a very security focused engineering leader, which is obviously a really good partner when you're in security. Um, and so he said, "Hey, I'm thinking about building out a DevSecOps function, and I'd love for you to come be a part of it." And I interviewed and wound up getting a role in the engineering organization as a senior manager of engineering. But I was really helping build out like the GRC focused perspective or aspect of DevSecOps, along with another architect or engineering or security engineering counterpart that I had at the time. And um, in that role, which obviously is very rare for a GRC person to get to have a seat
Yep.
at the table when it comes to engineering, um, to be inside of engineering and having the ability to affect the way engineers interact with the security team, because I had already worked as a member of the Twilio security team. This leader obviously saw the benefit of having someone like me inside of engineering to one liaise with the Twilio security team, but then to also help us address certain compliance and risk management initiatives that impacted them, but that they didn't really have a person to really focus on them and help the company help them be more secure in their operations. And so I was building out a compliance roadmap, continuous compliance, because I said, hey, I've got engineers at my disposal for the first time as a senior manager. So how about we do this continuous compliance thing? So I built out like a 5-year continuous compliance roadmap. So was working with the privacy team to help us get ready for Shrimps 2 and to be a part of Twilio's binding corporate rules. So it was a beautiful relationship to have someone like me who worked so well with engineers, having that GRC background, but also having worked with the Twilio team, to have someone like me inside of engineering helping address a lot of the GRC specific challenges that engineering team was having. And then through a certain set of circumstances, there was kind of a lack of direct leader managers, for certain Scrum teams. And so the goal was to say, hey, do you think you want to start, actually leading some engineering teams? My engineering, excuse me, my leadership prowess was recognized. And so I said, yeah, sure. I'll start leading some engineering teams. And I got a legacy platform team and a feature delivery team that started reporting into me. And that's really where kind of my education on how to lead software engineering teams at scales began. So I started there with the teams. I was still doing like the compliance and risk management work, some privacy work that the team needed, but I was actually responsible for feature delivery and running a legacy platform that was doing about $20 million of revenue at the time. And then through another set of circumstances, um, I was promoted to director of software engineering, and where I had 2 teams, I now had all 5 teams that were reporting into me. And about at the time, there was maybe 3 managers reporting into me, and then eventually it turned into 5 managers, a couple of senior managers, and then some managers, and then um, an architect as well as all of the additional feature delivery and platform team that comprised the engineering organization, about 33 people in total. So at the time we were growing about 50+% year over year, and we were doing maybe close to $75 million in revenue total. So I was responsible for all of the engineering operations for that amount of revenue and supporting thousands of active users on a daily basis.
Well, that's a beautiful story, James. And
Yeah,
let
it's
me
really
ask
cool.
you, it's a very interesting sort of intersection. If I were to draw a Venn diagram, right, a very interesting intersection of domains. But what did he mean by GRC perspective in DevSecOps? What did he mean by that?
Well, I think when you start thinking about, shifting security further left, um, I think a lot of it does start with what's on paper and how you move what's on paper into the actual processes and procedures of the engineering team. But when we start thinking about, and I think this probably isn't spoken about enough, when you have certain compliance requirements that are um, that an engineering team is responsible for, it's really helpful to have someone that you trust be able to translate those requirements into the actual engineering operations and the tools and processes that the engineering team engages in on a daily basis. So how does what we do to deliver code in a secure fashion, how does it meet the compliance requirements of SOC 2 or ISO 27001 from a GDPR and privacy perspective? When we perform these privacy impact assessments, are we doing them appropriately, right? Do we have a really fully good grasp on where our data is coming from, how it's stored, processed, and where it's going, so we can start building data maps to support our privacy initiatives for the entire company? Or when we deploy and we're running tests, we're running our tests, are we meeting the requirements of this control or that control when we run our scans on code? Are we doing that right now? Are we scanning code right now anyway? And if not, how can we get an initiative like that started so that we can start performing SAST and DAS scans, and which tools should we use when we're doing that? And so having someone like me to help the team, work with the security team to make sure, one, that we're meeting all those compliance requirements, that we're addressing vulnerabilities. I was once asked, like, hey, I've been told that we have a large amount of vulnerabilities that we need to address, and if we don't, then this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And I was asked to verify it. Like, I was trusted, right? Like, I want you to go work with that team and tell me what's really real. Tell me if this is really as bad as they're saying it is. Is this is really as risky, and what's the timeline in your estimation for, given this amount of people and what our current priorities are inside of engineering for our roadmap? How long do you think it would take to do it, and how many people would it take to actually achieve the remediation of the vulnerabilities that the security team has requested of us? So I think, to answer your question, I think, there's the governance piece. What policies are we going to write to make sure that they align with the policies of the organization? Which ones do we have to adhere to, and how do we adhere to them? How are we addressing and managing risks? Are there ways that in our deployment pipeline or process that we can perform risk assessments a little bit more quickly, so that we have a better handle on addressing issues before they're actually deployed into production? As opposed to having the security team tell us we have a bunch of vulnerabilities and bugs to fix. Let's see if we can catch them earlier. And I think that there's definitely there's a GRC focus on that, besides just, okay, how are we going to configure this tool, and what tool are we going to use, where maybe an architect might make some of those decisions along with principal and staff level engineers. But to make sure that you're doing all those things in a way that meets the spirit of the controls you're responsible for, is how I would kind of answer your question about the GRC focus from a DevSecOps perspective.
And I think that's a great statement, right? How do you meet the spirit of the controls, and how do you translate them into engineering operations, or operations that the engineers do? And how do you sort of measure them and feedback, and how do you sort of improve the overall security posture? Those are actually fantastic things. But the reality, what I come across in most cases, James, is that security is a theater, GRC is even more a theater, right? What has your experience been? You have gone through this in many iterations, through SendGrid, to Twilio, through Snapdocs, and now you run the entire GRC engineering program at Aquia. So my question to you is that, how do you see this theater? Why are people treating GRC? From what you're saying, that's the right thing to do. But then why are people not doing it in many cases? What has your experience been? And how should we think about this to make this more relevant?
Well, I guess I want to, you said GRC theater. You said that based off of what I said, I think people should treat it as GRC theater.
No. I don't think. I think
okay.
I think what you're basically saying is that you actually are trying to go back to the first principles, which I think the key word that you said is, how do you take the spirit and not just the letter of controls, and how do you make sure that those controls are activated and measured, aligning with what the what the operations are, generally speaking, but in your case, the engineering operations, right? So that makes all sense to me. But in most cases, what's happening is that GRC is being done towards an eye of the audit once a year, once a quarter at best. And that makes no sense, right? The cadence at which you're operating your SecDevOps or DevSecOps in engineering and versus quarterly or annual, the cadence is completely mismatched. What has your experience been with other companies as you talk with your peers in the industry, and why is this gap?
I think that's a complex question that I think that has macro and micro factors that participate in or influence the reason that GRC kind of shows up this way. One, I think we operate in an industry. So I think there's, now that I've been on both sides of this, I've been in the SaaS company environment, and now I'm doing federal, and they're night and day different, right? So I think there's far less theater on the federal side because you have federal regulations and laws that hold people accountable for securing their systems and services before they can even be deployed to production environments and released to the public, before they can, be put in front of people to be used. So if we talk about the SaaS industry, the reward and incentive structure around what is unlocked when you achieve a SOC 2 attestation, it supports the theater mindset of, I just need to get the SOC 2 as easily as possible, should I say, so that I can start unlocking certain deals and drive more revenue and bring in more customers because customers are asking for it. And when that is mainly the incentive, you'll stick with a SOC 2 attestation, and only do the bare minimum because that is just what's required. And then it comes down to, so you started the ecosystem that supports this, where companies are rewarded for getting it as quickly as possible, regardless of the process to attaining the attestation, so that they can unlock deals. But then you also have to go from there, you go into corporate leadership. And corporate leadership is generally around what's the least path of resistance, and how do I generate revenue and drive down costs? I mean, these are just the basic principles of running a business. And I think there are not enough leaders in the SaaS space that have attached revenue generation, or the lack thereof, to the potential lack of security around the data that they are guarding for their customers. And most of the discussions around data are, how can we unlock the data to generate more revenue? Not so much how can we protect the data and the infrastructure that the infrastructure that contains the data and transports the data, stores the data, computes the data. How do we make sure that balance is usually really hard? How much money should I throw into security in order to receive a certain return on that investment? So these are business decisions that have to be made. And what most companies usually find is that they can get a baseline of security with the least amount of financial investment. And so that leads to a bit of that theater that you're talking about, where we're just doing the bare minimum. We know we have a backlog of items. We know we have vulnerabilities that we're not going to address. And you get some of that security by obscurity, we like to call it, right? We just hope that nothing bad happens. But if it does happen, I think sadly enough, we've been witness to the fact that a lot of companies are able to still maintain a decent user or customer base. There's very little churn when data breaches happen. And I think the numbers support that. And I think a lot of companies realize that if they offer, credit monitoring services, then they can probably, and sometimes depending on the industry they operate in, they can get off with a slap on the wrist, because the penalty for having a lax security controls or a program that only focuses on what can be seen as opposed to the effectiveness of a built and well run security program, I think just lends itself to a little bit of that theater. So I think we've got to start coming up with the risk for some companies. The penalty just needs to be a little bit greater depending on the industry you're in. But yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you, how do these incentives differ or vary when you move from commercial into federal? You said the incentives are all that's creating this, right? So how are the federal incentives any different than the commercial?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are certain laws, and there's certain laws, executive, I forget, what you call them, when you have like an executive action or something like that. But the federal space is so, the controls are rigorous, the accountability and the oversight. Like there are certain offices for certain federal agencies that are built just to assess, audit the effectiveness of sub agencies and the effectiveness of their compliance programs, their risk management programs, their cybersecurity programs, because you have to. So this is something that I learned when I joined this space. If you've ever heard of the term ATO, or the authority to operate, that's a very serious and long and rigorous process to bring. Let's just say it's a website, it's a new service. For if it's a federal agency, you have to adhere to the the standards around achieving the authority to operate for any service that's going to be used by the public. And that process involves, it's highly based on what's called the risk management framework, or the RMF. And there's certain phases of that process that have to be undergone by any team that wants to deploy services to the public. And at the end of it, there's an authorizing official that has to review everything that you've put together. And this could be a 500, it's called a system security and privacy plan, that's put together by a team of what we call ISOs. That's an acronym. I think it's Information System Security Officer. But there's a team of people responsible for making sure that all of the controls in NIST 853, whether that's a low baseline or a moderate baseline or a high baseline, depending on the criticality of the service. We could be talking about 150 controls, 350 controls, 700 plus controls, where SOC 2 is only like, depending on if you do the security and availability trust service principles, you may be at 60 to 70 controls. And I thought that was a lot before I got into the federal space. But you have all these controls and how you're implementing them. And there's a ton of documentation that can come out to like 500 pages plus of documentation. And then the authorizing official at the end, there's a third party assessor that comes in and tests all those controls. And then all of that data is put together, and then the authorizing official comes in, reviews it, and says, okay, you now have the authority to operate.
No, makes sense.
So yeah, so
And James,
think
I'm
about
not
that.
trying to be contentious, but I'm just trying to understand this as well, which is when I look at, for example, the FedRAMP space, right, and the SSP, the security plan, the most common controls that are continuous in nature that I come across, in fact, the only few common controls that are continuous in nature that I come across are vulnerability management, right? Although there are 20 control disciplines, vulnerability management happens to be one of them. So is there over indexing on certain type of controls when we call them continuous? How are you seeing this evolve in the federal space? Are there all controls being monitored? I don't mean to say all. Are there many controls being monitored, or is the monitoring happens only for a few select controls? And is that good enough index to say that we are secure?
Yeah. I think there are certain control families that are most certainly indexed on higher. And the first one that comes to mind is access control. Like there's a lot of different access controls that are inside that family of controls that a lot of auditors and assessors will pay most attention to. And I think that makes sense. And there are certain control families that just have less controls in them. And maybe they're seen as less,
I
less
want to
critical.
clarify. My question is not so much on the controls. My question is more on the continuous nature of the control. So, which of these controls do you typically see continuously monitored, James?
Mm. Um, that's a good question. Um, in theory, all of them should
Have
be.
to be one.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Because I think it depends on what type of program you have. So at Aquia, where I am now currently, we focus on building out what we call cATO, or continuous authority to operate. But if you work in a more traditional ATO environment, all of those controls are being monitored on a pretty continual basis. You have to renew your authority to operate every 3 years, or if there's any significant changes to the control to the environment that the service of the system is operating in. Um, but all of them should be monitored on a pretty regular basis. But when you build out the continuous authority to operate, depending on the approach or the strategy or the model that you use to do that, in theory, all of those controls and the evidence for all of those controls is flowing through some type of data pipeline into maybe a GRC tool on a continuous basis. So each control family and the controls inside of that family you should have a pipeline that basically stores that evidence, transmits the evidence and the status of those controls, um, and when those controls are tested in a continuous fashion, when they generate evidence or when certain events happen, um, you should have a way, whether that's through a dashboard or a GRC tool, to be able to see and determine whether or not a control is effectively implemented or if there's been a failure at any point in time. And you should have the information that you need to be able to address the failure of that control and get it back into a status of being implemented or remediated. So, in theory, in a continuous ATO environment, all controls should be monitored regularly.
No, makes sense. I think that's a great response. And James, when you started talking about when the leader at Twilio hired you, and he said, "I want somebody who understands GRC, and I want somebody to come in and help me with DevSecOps," right? That person had a vision of basically bringing GRC, or whether risk compliance, however we term it, and security together. They saw that as sort of different facets of the same thing. Is that normal in your experience? And sort of what was your experience before and after the that Twilio experience where you brought GRC and security together?
Yeah, well, before that, and I think I'm answering your question here. Um, I was a GRC professional at SendGrid and Twilio, um, but that was also a domain of the security team. So we reported directly into security leadership. So I had only operated in a model where GRC reported into security leadership. Now, obviously, there are certain models where security reports into legal, finance. I've seen that. If you report into the executive, the CEO, you're lucky. Um, so yeah, certainly before that, GRC has been viewed as a domain of security, of cybersecurity, in my eyes. I think that for obvious reasons. And after that as well. So I've only operated in a fashion where GRC was a part of the security domain.
All right. But this person that hired you was not in the security team, they were in the product team. Is that correct?
Well, the person that hired me was VP of at the time, VP of that business unit. So that's product engineering, platform engineering, data engineering, everything, right? So they were the head honcho at the time.
That is a very, and the reason I'm asking that question, to go back, you beautifully laid out the incentive problem in the commercial space and why this is becoming a theater. You made a case fantastic. Why was that different in this person? He was a general man. I'm not trying to talk specifically about that person. I'm trying to understand your sort of experience. This person was in as a general manager of a product, right?
Yeah.
They were more interested in unlocking revenue. What was their motivation to build a better security and bring a person who was very conversant with risk and compliance to build that better security posture?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think the answer I think lies in a couple things from my perspective. One, this person, like I said, had been a leader at a security company.
Okay.
So for I don't know, over a decade. So that helped shape their mind around the importance of security in engineering and for any business. But I think also when you start having conversations with your engineering managers, and you're curious about the friction points that are potentially decelerating your velocity across your organization. And a central theme starts to come up where they're receiving tickets and stories that are security related, that are GRC related, compliance related, vulnerability remediation related. But then also as a leader, when you're meeting with security leadership and they're asking you to address certain vulnerabilities or take on certain initiatives because things are changing in the security landscape. So you now have to start finding ways to fit those things into your product roadmap. I think it becomes clear when you combine all those factors that you would, potentially have someone at the VP or general manager level that would say, hey, how can we start fixing these problems sooner so that I can accelerate
beautiful
delivery velocity?
Beautiful.
Right?
Yeah. And I want to ask you a related question, which is that I think we have had guests before on the podcast where they clearly articulate that GRC is an orchestration layer, right? It has a vantage point across many different teams, and they bring these different teams together, right, towards a common outcome: better compliance, better security, better risk management, so on and so forth. Why, in that case, I mean, we talk all about NIST 853 V5, we talk about ISO 27001, we talk about SOC 2. Why are we not talking about DORA? And by DORA, I don't mean the EU DORA. I'm talking about the DevOps DORA.
Yeah, the DORA metrics.
DORA metrics, exactly. Mm-hmm. I've never come across a single GRC team that has been responsible for measuring DORA metrics. Why? Have you done that in your role?
I actually love this question. I think, okay, so one, I don't think, for one, I think the average traditional GRC professional has no idea what DORA metrics are. Okay. Because that's from a DevOps discipline. And I think it was made popular by the Accelerate book from the author of the, what's the name of the project? The
Phoenix.
The Phoenix Project, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I say the average. Now, of course, there are some GRC professionals who maybe lean a little bit more technical and have heard of the DORA metrics. But this is what I think, so there's, maybe a lack of exposure from the traditional GRC mindset where you're basically running audits and answering security questionnaires. And, you're not thinking about how DevOps acceleration or how delivery acceleration and DevOps efficiency is measured, right? Mainly because there aren't really controls in any framework that ask you to measure those things, right? So you don't know you should care about them. I think too, I don't think there are a lot of engineering teams that measure them themselves.
That's very true.
Right?
Yeah.
So if your engineering team knows about DORA metrics, but isn't mature enough, hasn't reached a level of maturity to start measuring those metrics, then they're non-existent at your company. And I honestly haven't seen a lot of engineering teams that measure DORA metrics, right? So and maybe one or two, right? But do you have a good enough handle on your data to actually measure those? Because obviously, if you measure them, you want to actually improve them. But do you have a good enough handle on your data to make sure that it's trustworthy and the quality of that data is high? When you receive that data, do you actually have a mature enough program to put measures in place to actually improve on those metrics? Are you able to set thresholds? Is there a certain bar or a standard that you're trying to achieve with those metrics? Do you know why you want to try to achieve those? And I think that there are many engineering teams that haven't reached that level of maturity, especially if you're a fast growing startup where you're just trying to get the product out as quickly as possible, right? And you may not be measuring many performance metrics. You may not really have any KPIs because you're just trying to move fast, and which is totally understandable. But eventually, some organizations do get there. But I think to answer your question, um, I don't hear them spoken about enough. I am familiar with them, but they're not a very pervasive set of metrics that we certainly don't see across GRC. And I don't know how well adopted they are even across software engineering teams in many spaces as well.
Got it. And talking about velocity and change management, right? And especially from engineering all the way, what do you see in the new world of this agentic, the agents? How do you see that impacting GRC, particularly GRC engineering?
It's going to have a very, very, very large impact on GRC and GRC engineering. And this most certainly happens to be a space that I'm very interested in, fascinated by, and very involved in. Um, I I have side projects where I've built agentic workflows, chatbots that handle certain GRC specific tasks that meet maybe specific controls inside of a framework, just so that I could learn the power of agentic AI in GRC and how it could potentially be leveraged. So I think one of the biggest things, to be quite honest, I think is that um, GRC has a lot of manual, repetitive tasks that are associated with the role. And those are the tasks that are very good candidates for allowing agents or building agentic workflows to handle. And you start thinking about preparation for an audit. There's because in preparing for an audit, there are even if you're thinking about this from a traditional stance. So let's just say you haven't built data pipelines that go to a GRC tool that you could give to an auditor and they could see the status of every control at any point in time and track back, track to where the evidence is and perform their tests inside some tool. So you're streamlining the audit process. Well, let's just say you have a traditional GRC program the steps to prepare for an audit, they're repeatable. Like it's the same steps every year or every 3 to 6 months or whatever your audit cycle is. We've become so familiar. If you've run many audits, we've become so familiar with each of the steps. I've got to reach out to this person. The evidence needs to be here. This person needs to know that evidence. This is the way it, we collect it, and we have a repository for all the evidence and the screenshots. All of those are just steps in the process, and an agent most certainly could handle all of those steps. So I believe you could build out an agentic workflow that handles all audit prep. All you'd have to do is kick it off and go do something else. But you have to know how to build those things. And that's where, your the models that you chat with, Claude, OpenAI, ChatGPT, they can walk you through how to build those things. You just have to know what you want to build. And so once we start leveraging more agents in GRC, my claim is that GRC professionals will become even more valuable to a company, especially experienced professionals, because we have been so weighed down by tactical work that we get less opportunity to help the company be more strategic.
Beautifully said. Okay. Yeah. So I think this frees up time to do more analysis, research, right? Consulting, advisory within the organization, right? So
yeah, helping the organization prepare to open up additional markets.
Now, what do you think? So in most cases, the GRC tools, and I'm not saying all, but many of them have evolved to become glorified repositories, glorified S3 buckets and Google Drives, right? So what do you think is going to happen in this world of agents and agentic to those GRC tools and to the GRC market or the tools market generally?
I love this question as well. One, I think the incumbent GRC tools, I think they're going to have a lot to figure out over the next 3 to 5 years. I'll tell you why. Because I can build a GRC tool right now, and it would cost me way less money to do, and it would actually do what I wanted to do. I wouldn't have to submit a feature request. In fact, this is happening all the time. Like I know people who built GRC tools and they customized them for their company's use. And as people continue to iterate on those things, the incumbents, they're going to have to continue to find, obviously they found product market fit, but how are you going to continue to differentiate yourself from the people inside of these organizations who now say, we can build this ourselves and manage it ourselves, and that becomes a lot easier to do, so we can reduce our GRC tool spend. And I think you'll probably start to see over the next 3 to 5 years, people start to transition away from their traditional GRC tools, unless the cost of these tools continues to be driven down, and they start to offer a greater set of features that allow the builders inside these organizations to say, it's actually, I'm getting everything I want from this tool, everything I need from this tool, and it doesn't cost the company much to run it anymore. Right.
I love it.
Yeah. So that's where I think things are going for GRC tools.
Got it. No, I think that makes sense. But one of the challenges that I've come across is that people also have extrapolated this argument much further, where it's very easy to show a demo using your Claude desktop, Claude Cowork, but it is a very different thing to build a systems engineering or a systems platform. So to give you an example, I can use Copilot to create a Docker file, but can I use Copilot to create Kubernetes as a platform? Two different stories, because one is about a localized environment. The other one is orchestrating at scale. How do you see them? Not that it cannot be done, but what I'm trying to understand is that where do you see the line? Because at some point in time, this stops about being what I can build myself. It becomes about how do I maintain it and how do I maintain it sustainably?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. So obviously, I think there's some factors you have to consider when you start thinking about build versus buy, and I think that companies will go through kind of maybe their standard, depending on the size of the company, you'll go through your standard process on how much it costs, what's the return on the investment, what's the value that we're getting if we build versus buying something off the shelf. Um, and I agree. I think having managed services is what is allowed, and what I think will continue to allow certain platforms to continue to be successful when you start thinking about what that shared responsibility model is going to be and how easy it is to achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve with any tool. Um, so I think certain large enterprises will continue to leverage certain third-party managed platforms and tools. I'm thinking more about those startups. I'm thinking more about the startups who are very cost conscious, who don't yet have a very large user base to manage. Their footprint in the cloud is relatively small or potentially simple. And that they're scaling and growing, and they may make a different decision because they're builders anyway. And there's a culture in a lot of these SaaS companies that are, anywhere from 20 to 200 people, where building and innovation is actually more valuable than just buying a tool, throwing money at it, and hoping that and trusting that it'll all work. Then you think about those contract cycles and things of that nature. But if you have, I've seen this where people say, we built this tool, it's proprietary, and there's the management portion of that over time can get a little bit more complex. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't still happen, and I think it happens a lot more often than I think people think it does when you're a fast growing startup, especially in the tech space, versus a multi dozen thousand enterprise that can just throw money at a tool and doesn't really have the same concerns.
Makes sense. Makes sense. We are approaching the end of the segment, James, and I want to ask you. I want to close this segment with a question, which is for those people who are graduating, who are coming out of college, or who have taken their first job in GRC and are aspiring to become a GRC engineer. What would your advice be?
Yeah. If you are aspiring to become a GRC engineer, then my advice would be focus on the technical acumen first, because the compliance and risk management and the governance principles can you can pick those up. To be honest, you can learn those, but if you have a technical foundation where you're learning how to code, to build software, build systems, build services, understanding how the front end of applications work, how the back end of applications work, APIs, data integrations, and the cloud, especially understand how multiple cloud platforms work and the services inside of those platforms, how they work and can help you achieve the goals you need to achieve. But I also have a newer bit of advice that I would give an aspiring GRC engineer. I would tell them to learn some data engineering principles as well. And I haven't heard many people talk about this, and it's something that I'm starting to post on a little bit more. I have a project
Maybe
where I'm
double click on
currently,
that. What did you mean by
yeah,
what do you mean by data engineering?
um, learning how to understanding the ETL process, and especially the T inside of that acronym. How to transform and manipulate and clean and normalize data, how to query it, how to use it, because one, it is the lifeblood of agentic systems, but
Beautifully
it is
said.
also the lifeblood of a mature GRC engineering program, where you have all of these signals around you all the time in different data stores, and they hold the key to validating the controls inside of your framework. You just don't know how to get them. They're in different shapes, different formats. They're structured differently across your HRIS, Okta, across your SIM, across your ServiceNow, Jira, ticket management services, and things like that. You've got all of the answers around you, and a well-trained GRC engineer understands how to get all of that data into one place, transform it into a singular format, identify what the schema is for if you're going to store it inside of some type of database, or data warehouse or data lake, understanding how to get that all into a shape and format that actually works to validate the controls that you need to validate, and building that data pipeline. But there's going to be some level of transformation that has to occur. You're going to have to export that data. You're going to have to load that data somewhere. So I'm learning more in some of the projects that I'm working on around building data warehouses, that the ability to clean and normalize and manipulate different sets of data so that they all speak the same language and help you achieve your goals is going to be a skill set that I think GRC engineers will want to have in their toolkit in the future.
No, I think beautifully said. In fact, I think one of one of the most wanted jobs right now, even for those companies, model companies, is pre-training data skills.
Yeah.
Right? How do you source data? How do you curate data? How do you transform data? Like you're saying,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
you're absolutely spot on. James, this has been fantastic speaking with you. Uh, and thanks for coming on the show. Sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been great. And I'll also say, if anyone's curious about learning more about GRC engineering, I am the VP of a club that is a community of GRC engineers. So check out the GRC Engineering Club, and become a member, and you won't regret it. But reach out to me, LinkedIn, anything else like that, and we can have conversations and share our ideas about this. But thanks for having me. This has been a fun conversation.
Super cool, James. Thank you.